Welcome to the You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry podcast from Nashville, Tennessee. I am your host, John Martin Keith. Celebrities, working class musicians, and people who work behind the scenes in all areas of the music industry will share their stories, encourage you, and give practical advice of ways you can make a living doing what you love in the music industry. This episode is brought to you by Edenbrook Productions. Edenbrook Productions is the company I founded to help musicians grow in their craft. Are you a songwriter, but maybe you've been told your songs aren't quite there yet? Or are your songs ready, but you don't feel stage ready? Or maybe music is your passion, but you feel imprisoned by your day job and you don't know what to do next to make your dream a reality. Well, Edenbrook Productions is here to help. We offer consulting services via phone call, Skype, and FaceTime. And for the You Can Make a Living in the Music Industry podcast listeners, we're offering an introductory 1-hour consultation special. Click on the link in the show notes to contact me, and let's get you making a living in the music industry. Hey everyone, thank you for joining me today. This week I am talking with Doug Gould of Worship MD. Doug is a tech consultant who works with venues all over the country, helping train them and running their sound equipment and getting the best sound out of their gear and their room. He specializes in working with houses of worship and getting sound teams and worship teams to work together and create the best environment for people coming to worship services. Doug is also the artist relations rep for different musical companies. We are discussing training volunteers to run sound in churches, what a Worship MD weekend training event looks like, and the difference in communicating with people in various types of venues. Please enjoy my conversation with Doug Gould. Hey guys, I am hanging out here and talking with Doug Gould of Worship MD. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. You and I have been trying to get you on this show for about 3 or 4 years now, and schedules just are busy, and and that's part of the music business. That's one of the things that we talk about a lot on the show, is that with scheduling, and you're trying to figure out how to get people onto certain things or be a part of certain things, and sometimes you just have to be really patient and wait your turn until you can finally connect and get people together. So thank you for taking the time to be on the podcast today.
Well, thanks for asking me. My pleasure.
So you're in New Jersey, is that correct?
That's right. Don't hold that against me.
Well, I will not. Tell us where you're from in New Jersey, where you live, and a little bit of what you do with Worship MD, and then we're going to back up and kind of start from your journey and go forward from there.
Okay. Well, I live in New Jersey now, but I grew up in New England, and I ended up here because my wife had gotten a transfer to New York City. I could actually live anywhere east of the Mississippi because I was a regional manager of Tascam at the time. But so we moved to New Jersey, and I've been here ever since. And Worship MD is basically a company that I created after Shure let me go, and we'll get into that as we talk more about it.
Sure.
How that happened and how Worship MD got created. But basically, it's a market development company, a freelance, independent market development specialty that focuses on the house of worship market to build bridges between the industry, audio, music technology, and the church. And my main activities are teaching. That's how I get in front of volunteers at churches to teach them, give them a leg up on how to do things in audio or with a worship team better, because they probably haven't done this as a professional. They're not vocationally trained to be sound engineers or worship leaders or musicians. Yeah. So I'm trying to give them some of the tips and techniques, some shortcuts perhaps, so they don't have to go back to school to become an audio engineer. Yeah. And just learn the basics of what makes for a good mix, relationships, communication. And I did that 7 years at Shure, and I did that, for up until 2019 when the pandemic hit, 35 conferences a year. And then 2020, 2021, I did 5 in 2020. I did 5 in 2021. And the business basically imploded. By the end of this year, I will have done 20. And it looks like it's coming back stronger next year. So,
well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that things are getting back to normal for you. And such, one of the things that I love about what you're doing with Worship MD is that, because I'm a worship pastor and I'm a guest worship leader, so I go all over the country leading worship for churches and doing things like that. And the majority of churches do not have professional sound guys, sound teams or production teams or whatever. That's the large churches or the mega churches or whatever that have that real high end slick,
Right.
professional kind of look and feel to it. But the majority of churches don't have that. And so it's really nice. And I've worked with a lot of those people in those types of churches that are just kind of, figuring it out as they go. And so I've kind of done a little bit of what you've done and kind of help people along the way and try to help make them understand some certain things. But so it's nice that there's someone like you that is out actually training people and, helping people along, kind of come up to where a certain level of certain standard, if you will, I guess, of quality and of sound. So that, because we don't want sound to be a hindrance or a disruption. Right. To a congregation, and that very easily. And it's as soon as there's a problem, everyone turns around, looks at the sound guy, right, and makes them feel like a heel, like this horrible person because they hit a wrong button or they don't know how to run a fader or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So,
no, it's true, and I'm glad you're doing it too, man. It's because the more the merrier.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, the majority of churches, like 98% of the churches, do not have trained musicians or tech staff.
Yeah.
Even the person running lyric projection, I saw the last slide for the last 5 minutes. Can you please advance to the next slide so I'm ready for the lyric?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So I even think musicians would be better lyric presenters than some of the people we have doing it because they know how to look ahead. Right.
Right.
So just little things like that. And then communication, of course, between the teams. How do they communicate with each other?
Yeah.
So.
Well, we'll talk more about that here in a few minutes, but I want to back up and kind of walk through your story. Tell us where you came from, what got you into music, and how you kind of worked your way. I know you've done a lot of different things throughout your career, over 30 plus years now, that got you to where you are. So we'll talk about some of the different things that you have done that have kind of worked you up the ladder to what you do these days.
Okay. When people look at me, they probably think of me more as a sound tech when they're at a class, at a worship conference, like that. But I'm primarily a musician. I started playing piano at 7 years old because my mom was a professional singer, could play anything, Chopin, Liszt. She grew up in a musical family. My grandfather was a band leader and director. And so it was no choice. You're going to learn to read and write. You're also going to learn to read and write music. So at 7 years old, I was enrolled in piano classes and didn't like it for 2 years maybe. And then all of a sudden the Beatles came on the scene and I was hooked and just started wanting to play more and more. Wanted to be a rock star when I was a kid. Played in bands in high school. Then at the end of high school, I didn't really, even though I tried to go to music school, it wasn't for me. And Vietnam was happening and I knew I'd be drafted if I left school. So I enlisted in the Navy. In the Navy, I was in there for 4 years. I was an assistant to a hand surgeon, believe it or not.
Wow.
Did tendon transplants and amputations.
Wow. And oh, goodness.
I thought I wanted to be a doctor. I was teaching residents how to suture.
Wow.
So if not a doctor, at least a physician's associate. Yale had offered me a free program because I was a military medic, and they were looking for that. The training that we got in the Navy was, very practical, and you don't find that in the civilian life too often, where a medic who's not a doctor can actually put cast on, read x-rays and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But soon after I enrolled in college, somebody said, "Do you want to be in a rock band?"
Oh, wow. just random, right?
And I said, "Yeah, that sounds a lot better than school. I'll do that."
Yeah.
So I played in rock bands. I worked in hi-fi stereo shops. A lot of my chops for audio came from working with professional home sound systems.
Okay.
And playing in bands. And then at 30 years old, my girlfriend and I got saved. I was going down the wrong path with the rock band, a lot of on-the-job hazards, if you will,
right,
that were abusive to me and to people around me. And this pastor who had been witnessing to me for 2 years, even though I didn't want to hear about Jesus, finally got to me. And I went to his church and fell on my knees before God and asked him to come into my life.
Amen.
Got married and then had to get a real job. I couldn't play in the rock bands anymore. So I worked in a music store called Center Music in Newington, Connecticut. And I was there for 3 years. And a rep firm had asked me to come to work for them because of my sales chops. And I was a JBL, Harman rep, Soundcraft, Kramer guitars when Eddie Van Halen was still playing them.
Yep.
Audio-Technica microphones. And I did that for about 3 years. And I was getting a little worn out because I was going all over New England, which is not a big territory, but I was in the process of having children, and I was making less money in my third year than I was my first year. And I got to do something to get better here. I remember going to a music store and went into one of the bathroom stalls, and there was an old music industries magazine there. And looking through the classified, and there was a company called E-Mu Systems. I don't know if you remember them. They made products like the Proteus, SP12 drum machine, Emax samplers. Kerry Livgren from Kansas used an E3 sampler. They're pretty popular synthesizers and samplers. And I'm a keyboard player. So I said, well, this job looks great. So then I closed the cover of the magazine, and I noticed the magazine was like 8 months old. I said, oh, man, I'll never get this gig. This gig is long gone. But I sent my resume in anyway. Next thing you know, I'm getting an interview, second interview, third interview. And I got the job as Eastern North America Regional Sales Manager for E-Mu.
Okay.
The problem was they had me on the road 4 weeks a month, and I had 2 little boys at home. And so my boss at E-Mu, who was originally at Tascam, went back to Tascam, and he said, hey, they're looking for a regional for the East Coast. Do you want it? I said, okay, I'll interview. So the interview came, and they offered me less money than I was making, but I hit them back with this. I said, look, I'll take less money. In my mind, I knew I'd make more money eventually because Tascam was just a much larger company.
Sure.
You know, all the tape recorders and stuff that they made, I knew it would be a matter of time before I was doing okay. And I said, but I want this. I want to only travel 2 weeks a month. I want to be home with my boys half the time. And they could let me live anywhere. It was a remote job except for the travel. And they accepted. And I was there for 10 years until 9/11.
Okay.
November after 2001. And I was getting remarried to a woman I met in church with 6 kids. And we were signing on a house in 3 days after I lost my job. I called her. I said, I think we better postpone the wedding. She goes, you're not getting out of it that easy. I got 6 kids over here. And I had 2 kids. So we had 8 blended family. And she says, you're going to get the best job you ever got in your life. I said, oh, man, I don't know. I went to NAMM show, had 14 interviews in January, came back with nothing. But one of the interviews was with Shure. And then they asked me for a second interview. And in the third interview, they called me back and said, when can you move to Chicago? And I said, I told you in the first interview I can't relocate. I have a co-custody situation. And they said, well, we'll have to go back to the board and talk about that. They called me back. All right, we're going to hire you. What's my position? We don't know yet. We just want to hire you.
Wow.
And that's the first time I've ever heard that. I assumed it was going to be another sales job because that's all I'd ever done. But when they came back with the title of U.S. Market Development Manager, I didn't even know what market development meant. I didn't know what that was. I'm not a marketing guy. And they said, well, it's basically the same as sales, except you're not going to sell. You're going to go and inform people of what the applications are of our products to groups of people who might want to know more and get them resourced. And there's a bunch of verticals in that. There's touring, there's install, there's theater, there's education, there's government, there's house of worship. And then bing, house of worship. I can devote time to any of those verticals. I would like you to cover most of them, but some of them are going to require more attention than others. And I soon found myself spending more and more and more time over the 7 years I was there as the house of worship guy.
Okay.
Because they needed the most help. What am I going to go to a studio and tell them how to use mics?
Right.
You go to a theater thing. And where do people from church congregate to learn? At worship conferences. So I didn't have to knock on the door of 350,000 churches. But I remember the CEO called me to his office one day when I was at Shure for a quarterly meeting. And he said, Doug, you might not be prepared, but I want to find out why you're spending an inordinate amount of time on the church. And I didn't have any facts or figures, metrics with me. I wasn't prepared, but I did see a big Chicago phone book on his desk. I said, well, what verticals would you like me to cover? He said, well, how about theater? I said, open the book to theater in the Yellow Pages. You remember Yellow Pages?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I grew up on the Yellow Pages.
And there's like 2 columns of theaters in a big city like Chicago, 2 columns. Okay, how about recording studios? Even less. All right, how about education? The blue pages for education, pretty thick.
Mm-hmm.
This is go to churches.
Yeah.
Almost the whole phone book, right?
Right.
I guarantee every one of them has a PA system in it and a person who doesn't know how to run it.
Yep.
And a musician who doesn't know how to relate to the sound system. They need help. And that's why I'm doing this. He said, carry on. So then they put me in charge of artist relations for the stuff too for a while, even though it was a side job. It wasn't my main job. They wanted me to find the worship artists who could benefit Shure as influencers. And I told them, I said, you don't have anybody right now. Sure we do. We have, Kirk Franklin. We have, all these urban gospel bands, which is great. I'm glad. But you don't have anybody from any other genre there. They said, well, go and find us someone. So I went to the Dove Awards. We equipped the whole stage with Shure mics and have been ever since. And Mercy Me won their first Dove Award. And I said, let's sign them. And then I signed Chris Tomlin. And then I signed Lincoln Brewster. And then I signed Crowder. And I signed bunches. And I gave them in ads. They were personality-driven ads. And,
let me ask you, let me pause, take a break.
Sure.
Let me break just for a second here. And I want to go back and talk about the Dove Awards.
Okay.
With you're talking about Shure installed all the mics. So the Doves are using Shure brand mics for the award show, right?
Yeah.
How did you get that? Like, how did you go about reaching out to them to say, hey, we want the Dove Awards to use Shure mics? And can you explain how that worked and why they said, oh, yeah, let's do that? Sure.
Yep. Well, Shure had some limited experience with the Doves before then because we have an installed artist relations guy they named Ryan Smith who works out of Soundcheck.
Okay.
Got an office there.
In Nashville.
And I told him we had an opportunity to do the Doves because I knew somebody at Gospel Music Association. He said, well, what do they want? I said, I think they want all the drum stages with Shures and probably wireless.
So did Gospel Music Association reach out to you guys saying we want Shure mics?
I reached out to them. I was proactive. I said,
okay,
we'd like to be involved with the Doves. Is there any way we can help you guys?
Okay.
And they said, well, we're typically having to rent from a sound company all the mics. So if you can supply microphones for us, that would be a big help.
I see.
So we did that. And I think we had 8 stages of Shure mics that were rolled out for each band. And
right.
But Ryan took care of most of that. That was his gig in Nashville. He's doing country music awards. He's doing all that stuff. So we supplied the mics, and I think they have been. It's usually shared microphone because some people are endorsing mics. So you might have Sennheiser and Audio-Technica and some other ones involved, but Shure did all the drum stages for sure.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to, for people listening, they're like, oh, we want to work in this particular area. Like, how do we reach out to a certain company if we need them to supply something or we want to supply something to them, whatever, kind of what that entails. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, there's a non-church thing that happened with Ryan and me. He asked me one day on the phone, I was living in New Jersey. He says, Doug, how many Shure Beta 56s and 57s do you have? Which are drum mics, dynamic drum mics. I said, I don't know, I got probably half a dozen of each. He goes, can you get up to Madison Square Garden today? I said, for what? He goes, The Who lost their drum package, and I need you to bring some mics up. I said, sure, I'll do that.
Okay.
Knocked on the door. Guy met me. I went out, gave them the mics. They set them up. I went out to front of house. And in an empty Madison Square Garden, watched The Who, Soundcheck Won't Get Fooled Again, in front of my very eyes. It was like exhilarating. Wow. And then he asked me to stay for the show and sit right next to him at front of house. It was amazing. So
that's cool.
Yeah, so
That's
there's
awesome.
some benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. That's super cool. And so you're working with Shure for a while, and I love that you're working with, going around and working with the churches. But let's walk out of that for a second and talk
Sure.
about the other venues that you did work with. So like theaters and recording studios. Granted, there's not as many, which you talked about.
Right.
The Yellow Pages they're not being there. But you're going all over the country doing this, right?
Yeah, my travel budget was $100,000 a year.
Okay, well that's not too bad.
Just for travel.
Right. Not too bad. So when you are working with other types of venues or companies to do this, how different is it from working with churches in this capacity, or is it different at all?
Yeah, it is different. I mean, even when you're writing articles, you have to have some different terminology. It's not an audience, it's a congregation.
Sure.
It's not a stage, it's a platform.
Yeah.
So there's certain things that are going to have to be written a specific way. Now, it comes down to the actual technical things. A fader is a fader. I don't care if you're in the secular or the sacred world. A high-pass filter is a high-pass filter. That doesn't change. But who they are using it for changes. And the communication is different, too.
Okay.
So
can you talk about that? Like, how do you communicate with someone who's working at a theater versus someone who's working in the sound booth of a church? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Typically, the guy in a theater knows what he's doing already.
Okay.
So I don't have to spend as much time going over basics like don't mix with your inputs, mix with groups,
Right.
High pass everything. I have to explain what a high pass filter is to a volunteer. They don't know not to turn them off and to eliminate all the rumble and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. They don't know that even though my digital mixer has compressors on every channel, why shouldn't you use all of them at the same time? So when I'm talking to a theater guy or a professional touring sound engineer, a monitor engineer, somebody in a corporate AV world, those people kind of know what they're doing already. I have to start from the bottom of the barrel to teach these guys what sound is, what microphones do, how they transmit energy into the mixer, how it comes out of the speaker, where to put the speakers, where to put a microphone so it works better. So you don't have to do as much work at the console. All the theater studio guys, they know that stuff pretty much already. I'm not going to teach them anything they don't know. And again, I'm not an engineer to take them to that next level. I'm primarily a musician who's trying to help volunteers learn the basics of sound. Mm-hmm. So that's my niche.
Yeah.
I do that probably better than a lot of engineers would because they're going to assume too much to begin with. And they don't know who the church volunteer is. I went out with Shure one time with our expert guy. I'm not going to name him, but he's famous at Shure for education. He's written articles for them. He's an applications engineer. He's a rocket scientist, basically. He's an aerophysicist. Wow. He went out and did a class with me at a church to teach them about microphones. One of the first things I ever did at Shure. As soon as he opened his mouth, everybody in the room was glazing over. They had no idea what he was talking about. The physics and math of it, they don't care about how to build the watch. They want to know what time it is.
Right.
That's what I'm trying to teach.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the difference.
Sure.
So
that's great. And that makes total sense. Just like I'm a guitar teacher. It's similar in the sense that a lot of people as musicians are incredible guitar players. I know tons of guys who will blow me out of the water any day of the week who've been playing a fraction of the time that I've been playing. And I've been playing most of my life, even though this is what I do for a living. But as a guitar teacher, they have no clue how to teach a student how to play guitar, where this is what I've been doing for years and I'm really good at it. Right. So there's performers and then there's teachers and then there's a hybrid of the two. And I'm a hybrid of the two. And then there's guys, rocket scientists who know all the mathematician aspects of it, of building a microphone and what it does.
Right.
There's a musician who can sing into a mic and understands what it's supposed to do. And then there's a guy like you who can explain that to an audience without their eyes glazing over. So, so we're similar in that sense in two different areas.
I couldn't agree with you more. My wife is a vocal coach, and some of the things we go to, they have the celebrated singers teaching classes, and a lot of them are teaching such wrong things that hurt the voice rather than help the voice. My wife is all about singing for a lifetime and creating healthy singing applications. And some of these people like adding air to the tone. Hey, I want to sing like this.
Right.
That's one of the worst things you can do to the voice. So you have this really well-known singer maybe who's teaching kids how to sing stylistically that's damaging to them. Mm-hmm. Or a basketball coach. The best basketball coaches weren't great basketball players.
Right.
If they could see the game and know how to strategize and plan defense, offense, it's the same thing.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things with producers as well.
Yeah.
You guys who are producing records and different things like that is like producers are not necessarily always musicians or amazing musicians, but we understand how it all works together and how to put things together in a way that, just like being a director, TV or movie,
right.
Like they're not the actor who's going to be on the screen doing it, but they know how to get the actor to say what they want it to say to make it come across to the audience what it needs to be, right?
That's exactly right. And creating that environment where the musicians are able to be creative and create, as opposed to like dictating what they need to do all the time. You think of Quincy Jones was a visionary, but he had Bruce Swedien as his engineer who could pull off all the vision of what he was trying to produce. Ted T, he's not a great musician. Great producer. Dave Leonard, he's both. He's a great musician and he's a great producer, Yeah.
So how many years were you with Shure?
7.
7 years.
Yeah. When I got let go, I had just won Employee of the Month the year before they let me go.
Oh, wow.
And Leanne Albrecht, I don't know if you know her, Carl Albrecht's wife, she called me and said, how many years were you at Shure? I said, 7. She goes, yeah. You know what that is in scripture? That's a year of completion. So it's time for you to plow new fields. Mm-hmm. What I did was I still had 25. This was in May of 2009 that they let me go. I had 25 events left on the calendar year to complete for sure. I said, you're letting me go, but who's going to do these events now? We've kind of obligated ourselves. We've committed to them. This way, you're going to have to call them all up and tell them you won't be coming, right? I said, I guess so, if that's what you want me to do. You don't want to fulfill them yourself after I'm gone? No. Okay. I called them all up. Without exception, every one of the conference directors or coordinators said, Doug, we never cared about Shure. What can you do to get here to teach? That's what we want. Mm-hmm. And that's when the light came on. Yeah. Right after that phone call, the last one, Audio-Technica called me out of the blue. I know it was providential. It was by design. He knew it was going to happen. I didn't. I was worried, anxious. And AT said, we like what you're doing. We can't hire you full time. Do you have any way that we can work together? And that's when the whole thing started to roll out. Maybe I can become an independent market development specialist. I already have the events. I just need to find the support. Just like a missionary who's going back to Africa. He has to visit some churches to get the support he needs to create disciples. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not just trying to teach audio. I'm trying to teach people how a privileged job it is to be at the sound console or on the platform, bringing the word of God and praise to God. And the mission didn't stop, and it's still going on, even though the pandemic tried to ruin it all. So
once you started going out on your own and working with Audio-Technica and so this is when you're doing Audio-Technica and the conferences, are you doing this? This is not Worship MD quite yet. But this is Worship MD.
It is Worship MD now, yes. I created that name because I took what Shure had called me, Market Development Manager, and turned that into Worship Market Development. So I'm not the worship doctor. It's Worship Market Development.
Okay. Because a lot of people probably ask you that question, right?
All the time. And I'm not going to come in and diagnose your church. Yeah. I'm not going to throw a sheet over it and say, you're done. I'm here to develop a relationship between who I'm working for and the church. That's what it is.
Okay. Now, this is going to be a really random question that has nothing to do with music itself, but I was looking on your website and I was looking at your logo, and you got the W in the box with a little water drop that looks like above it, and then a little MD. So, and you're like, why is he asking me this question? Well, because for those of us that are in music and we're doing music for a living, in whatever area that we're doing in, and we're creating a brand of ourselves, for our company, we have to put something out there that the audience or subscribers or whoever,
Mm-hmm.
can relate to us and understand who we are based off of whatever that logo is, because that's what we're creating, a branding. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So why did you create this particular logo for Worship MD? Like, is there a specific thing that that's supposed to relate to, or is it just, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. To tell you the truth, I had very little to do with the creating of the logo.
Okay.
I had a friend named Joel Clamper, who's a worship pastor up in Rhode Island. He's also a graphic artist. And I said, you got some logo ideas for me? And he came up with that one, and I liked it. It just
looked good.
So that was it.
Okay. And that's fine. I mean, there doesn't have to be some grand design behind it.
No, right.
And a lot of people, sometimes there is. Sometimes there's a very specific thing that people are trying to create. And sometimes it's just, hey, this looks good.
Yeah.
My Edenbrook music logo for my company is 3 colored dots that kind of have a mid-mod color look to them. And it's odd that my daughter asked me just a few days ago, it's like, why, or is my wife wanted to, what are the 3 dots for? And I had to think about it for a second because I couldn't remember. It's been so long ago since I created them. I was like, well, the 3 dots represent us. I mean, it's our family. There's 3 of us, and I love mid-mod colors, and it just kind of had a cool look to it. So that's what I went with. There wasn't any grand design behind it, but I loved the way that looked. And
right.
So that's the logo for my company.
Right.
And sometimes it's just that simple. So what's the reaction when you're doing conferences? Because are you specifically only doing worship or doing churches nowadays, or do you still work with other venues outside of the church? Or is it, I know it's mainly the church, but
it's focused on church, and whether or not it's at a conference or at a particular church that hires me or me and my wife to go and help them for a weekend seminar with their staff. It's still church related that way, but I've had retailers ask me to come in to help them focus on the church. So as a consultant, Line 6 hired me to consult with them. How did we reach the church with our wireless microphones? So I consulted them for a day. Sweetwater has had me in to teach GearFest, which is not necessarily a church thing, but my workshops were church oriented within the context of GearFest. Then they had another one called Worship Connect. I've done one for, there's a group of retailers that are independent, but they buy as a group. And I've done seminars for them to show them how to create maybe a rehearsal space for churches to come into their stores maybe after hours, like on a Thursday night, set up a quiet stage with in-ear monitors, electronic drums, Line 6 or some amp modeling, and show them how to create quiet stage environments for their churches. And then just get in your Google Maps, and within 25 miles of you, there's probably going to be 100 churches that you can call up directly and say, hey, we want to invite you to come and try out the stuff. It'll be yours alone. There'll be nobody else in the store. And so I've done some things like that for churches to help them connect to churches. Don't be afraid of the church. There's still a lot of manufacturers that do this to the church. And there's other manufacturers who actually have hired full-time house of worship liaisons to help them. Yamaha has had one for a while. It's Brett Armstrong at Yamaha. It's Gould and Preciado at QSC. It's Samantha Potter at Allen and Heath. So you've got specific people in big manufacturer companies that have dedicated. In fact, Sweetwater itself, of the 520 sales engineers that they have on the phones, 125 of them are dedicated to house of worship.
Wow.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
They send out 4 times a year 100,000 thick catalogs on their stuff. They're really devoted. And they're showing up more and more at worship conferences to try to deepen that road. And so.
Can you talk about kind of give us like a 30,000 foot view of what you do when you're working with specifically a church, I'll say that, as opposed to a conference right now.
Right.
Can you kind of go into some detail about, okay, this is what it looks like when I go in and work with a church. This is what I'm teaching them. This is how we're kind of what we're focusing on. This is how we're kind of doing specific things.
Sure.
Can you give us some insight into that?
Yeah. Before I go to the church, I'm going to ask for some qualifications of the personnel that I'm going to be working with.
Okay.
How long have these people been doing this? What is their full-time occupation? Just from that, if somebody's been mixing for 15 years at a church, but they're a full-time plumber or a cop or a school teacher, I know that they're not a full-time sound guy. So even though they've been mixing for 15 years, they could be mixing 15 years the wrong way.
Right, sure.
I don't know. And sometimes you have an old curmudgeon who doesn't even allow you to get near his soundboard. Sometimes it's a young tech newbie who's just so hungry he's like a sponge. He'll take everything in. So I asked some qualifying questions on what they know about audio first. Same thing with the worship team. I'll ask them how many have played in bands professionally, how many have been in recording studios. So I have some kind of semblance of who I'm going to be working with. And I think if it's time for a review, because that's what I call it, let's review. Let's not teach you these things. I want to see where you guys are at. And I want to not give you information that you already know, but I want to find out where you're at. So when we go forward, you'll take away something from it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So that's the first thing I'll do in the morning as I do that. I review. I ask some questions. Everybody know what a high-pass filter is? If none of the hands go up, even with the guy for 15 years, I'm going to start there. If they're all raising their hand for every question I says, I can move on. The afternoon, I like to bring the band in because I like to see what the communication is like between platform and the booth. How are they communicating? Are they friends? Do they know each other? Do they like each other? Or is it, hey, you back there, can you push up fader 3? Then I know there's some problems in communication. It's just like on the road. There might be the most talented sound guy that you have with your band touring. But if he's a jerk, he's not going to be lasting very long. Go get somebody with less talent who's easy to work with.
Yep.
Try to stress relationship and get outside of your environs here and get together more. Have a devotional together. Have a small group worship tech devotion instead of a men's group or a women's group on Wednesdays. You guys get together. It doesn't have to be all the time.
Yeah.
And hang out. That's what I love about worship conferences. When teams can come to an affordable conference, they can come together and get some bonding done together as a team because they're outside of their church. You don't make friends at work. You make friends outside of work. And then if you work with them, you're friends.
Right.
So then I look at that. I do a proper sound check training with them. How do we sound check? How do we optimize the microphone's input so it works well with the mixer? High pass, mixing with groups, put things into groups. I can mix with fewer faders. Tell them like I can do a whole show with 2 faders, band and vocal, even if that's all you have. So that's what I do. It's a basic overall training of the team and then technical aspects and some musical aspects.
Yeah. I mean, is it typically a one-day event? Is it a weekend event or?
It could be a Friday night. So I get to hear the worship team with the sound guys beforehand. Just as a listener.
Yeah.
And observe, not say anything until Saturday morning.
Okay.
And then all day Saturday. And then sometimes come back and debrief to see how they did after the training on Sunday morning. Sometimes it's a whole weekend. Sometimes if it's local, it's just one day.
Okay.
And lately, it's all been about streaming. It hasn't even been about live. It's because the streams are so awful.
Yeah.
But the problem is not just the equipment, having a separate room and all that. It's like, I can't find one guy to mix front of house. Where am I going to find another guy to mix a broadcast mix?
Right. It's 2 different things. Can you talk a little bit about the difference in a live mix versus a stream mix?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you yourself know as a performing musician, when you're in the room, certain things don't have to be reinforced as much because they're in the room. Drums. They're already going to be loud.
Right.
Right? Guitars. As much as I want that guy to turn down his Vox AC30, it's still mixed so much in the house, I can't even get it in the mix for the system because he's too loud. So if I look at my console, the louder instruments in the room, their fader positions are going to be much lower than where the vocals are. So a lot of people, what they do in a stream is they stream their front of house mix to a device. It's going to Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and they haven't accounted for the room differences. So the mixes sound thin, no bottom end, no drums, vocal heavy. So I said, the first thing you can do to make that better is to add a pair of room mics or more and add that to your stream mix. If you have nothing else to do, you're the only guy who can mix, you don't have a separate room, a separate mixer, all of that stuff, just add the room back into that mix, and that will help a lot. Think of hearing Frampton Comes Alive without the audience, and it's just not the same thing.
Right.
So,
sure.
But then we go to steps beyond that. Some people are using an iPhone. Some people are using an aux mix, but how do you do an aux mix and a front of house mix and monitor it at the same time if you're one guy? So I try to give them some tips on if it's one person mixing everything, here's some things you can do. If you go to the next step, get a separate room, even a janitor's closet. Maybe you can use an iPad. You have a digital mixer. You can use an app to make your stream mix, or you can use a hardwired monitor mixer like an Aviom or a P16. That could be your monitor mixer. You don't have to go out and buy another Digico or an SSL for your broadcast mix. So, but there's steps along the way. And I try to give them step 1, step 2, step 3. So if you're here, you can go here. If you're here, you can go here. And just improve. What can I do to make it better? In fact, there was a couple months ago, there was nothing going on for conferences. So I watched 15 church streams from the Trenton area, and they were all awful. So I said, that's it. I'm going to make an ad, local Facebook thing, and say, I'm going to teach a class every Tuesday night for 3 hours a night on how to make your streams better. And I got pretty good attendance. The streams have gotten a little better. A little.
Good. Yeah. Little's better than nothing.
Yeah.
A little can go a long way when it starts off really bad, right?
Yeah. In fact, the next 3 conferences I'm teaching, I have a dedicated class called How to Improve Your Audio Stream. I'm not a video guy, so I'm not going to tell you anything about Blackmagic or the Canon or Panasonic cameras you're using or your editing. I'm not about that. But if we watch a stream and the video is 4K, but the audio is awful, you're still going to turn it off.
Yeah.
So if I can't hear it, I'm going to find somewhere else I can hear it.
Sure. When you are going out and doing these things, seminars or conferences or whatever, when you're working with churches specifically, what's the ratio? I mean, at this point in your career, I know it's going to be lopsided that you got more people reaching out to you than you reaching out to people to come do it for them. But, how often do churches reach out to you to ask you to come do something with them as opposed to you reaching out to people nowadays and saying, hey, can I come to your church?
Right.
Does that make sense?
That's what they do. They usually ask me that at a conference.
Okay.
So they'll say, boy, we got a lot out of your classes, but at a conference, there's only 3 workshops and, it's helpful, but it's not like being at our church with our gear, with our people. So can you come? And I said, well, where do you live? Oh, I live in Boise, Idaho. Oh, I live in Princeton, New Jersey. You know it's going to cost me to fly out there to see you? I could probably find somebody near you that could help you. Now, maybe it won't be the same as me coming. Maybe it'll be better. I don't know. But I started putting together a few years ago, and I've never pulled the trigger on it. But I know about 400, 500 techs around the country who I would qualify as being like-minded to me and know as much or more than I do. And I was going to create a network called EMT. I'm the MD.
Right.
That would have educating ministry technicians around the country. That if somebody was in Boise, I probably would be able to find them somebody within 50 miles to help them.
Okay.
And then I was going to monetize that by taking just a percentage of whatever they charged for their services. But I never pulled the trigger. I never put the website together. It's just, I get all the techs. They're waiting. They keep asking me, are you ever going to do anything with this? Well, during the pandemic, it would have been useless to try that anyway because everything was locked down. But now it might be a good time to rethink it. And
I think that's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. So anyway.
I think you should do that. Now, is there a reason why you yourself don't go all over the country to do it yourself now if someone calls you?
No, I just did a church 3 months ago in Salt Lake City. They were willing to pay the flight, the rental car, the hotel, and then pay me my fee for 2 days. So there are still some churches that I don't care what it costs. We want you to come.
Sure.
So I'll do it if they're, but I'm trying to make them realize what it's going to cost them. That's an expensive proposition to do that. You sure I can't find somebody else to help you? My brother lives in Las Vegas. He's a believer. He runs down a church. He's like a 5-hour drive from them. I said, I could send my brother up. He said, no, we want you. Okay, well, I'll still bring my brother. And there's churches.
Well, but you built.
So, what's that?
You built a reputation. You built a reputation for yourself and what you do, and so people trust. Once they hear you at a conference, they're like, okay, that's the guy. I don't want that guy, and we don't want anybody. And I understand that. I totally get that. There a lot of times that's the way that I am. There are specific people that I want to talk to at a company that I know, and I've heard them. I related with them in some form or fashion, and once that person is in my brain, that's the only person that I want. I don't trust anyone else as much as I'm going to trust that person.
Yeah.
And whether or not that's true or not, in reality, that's what is in our minds. So it's hard to break that sometimes.
I think it is. I'm about ready to I'm going to be 70 in October, and my hearing has been hurting for a while. So my wife, who's been wearing hearing aids for a long time, finally convinced me to go for my hearing tests the other day. And it's bad. It's really bad. So I'm getting hearing aids. Yeah. But her doctor, she trusts implicitly. And when we walked into the office, there was an intern there. And my wife says, no, we don't want to see you. We want to see Dr. Brady.
Yeah.
And I don't think she was put off, but it's just the way it is. We don't want somebody who's learning how to do it with my husband. I want the real thing.
Yeah.
And it isn't so much my technical skill or any of that. I think it's more my heart for people, that I just have a heart to help people. And, but there's plenty of people out there that know a lot more than I do, and maybe would be better served in some ways, but I guess they see the ministry part of me more than that. And then a lot of guys who teach sound too, they're teaching it in a vacuum. I read these articles about how to make a better mix, and they never mention the band.
Yeah.
Well, how do I get a good mix if the band is not good? If the source doesn't sound good? If the singer's out of tune? If there's no new strings on the guitar? If the drum heads have never been changed?
Sure.
You can't do that in a vacuum. It's a dovetail thing. The sound person is a fifth element of the band. The room is part of the band. I mean, I can't do things just from a mixer or in a box. Yeah. So it's holistic. My approach is holistic. I have to have everybody there, team of the band, the team of the sound guys. Some people in the church would be nice to show how the sound changes. But
that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. Can you tell us, if somebody's listening to this podcast and they're like, okay, we want Doug Gould, Worship MD, to come to our church or our venue. It doesn't even have to be a church. Right. I know that's the main focus, but just we trust this guy. We've listened to him now, and we're familiar with who he is. Knew about him beforehand, even before he's on this podcast. But we need someone to come, and we want you to come and teach us how to do all this stuff. Mm-hmm. How much does it cost for Worship MD to come do a seminar at a church, like the 1 or 2 day weekend event? Not counting the travel cost, but just the event itself. How much does that cost?
Again, I look at the church and what they can afford. It's not really a riding scale. Okay. Like if it's a church I know that's kind of small and hurting for money, I'll charge $100 an hour. So if it's like a weekend thing, I might charge $1,500 from Friday to Sunday, something like that, plus expenses. If it's a local church, I might do it for like less than that. If it's right down the road, I'll do it for $500 for the day, because that's nothing. I just go there it's not a set rate. I'm not charging $300 an hour for 8 hours, anything like that.
Okay. Well, I think just people want to know, to be familiar with, to kind of know ahead of time, okay, we can afford this, we can't afford this. What can we do to make this work? Could we negotiate if, do you have some flexibility if we're close, but we're not quite there? And, that kind of stuff.
You know what else I try to tell them to do, which helps them a lot. And my wife does the same thing. Sometimes we teach together. She's a vocal coach. So I teach the techs and the worship team. She's working with the vocalist, and we do like a team rate. But what we also try to do, if we're both invited, is say, look, this is not going to be for 3 or 4 months. Do you think you'd want to take some time to promote to your community that you're going to have us there? And then maybe you can charge like $25 a person to come to your own local conference. That'll help offset your costs significantly. And a lot of people have done that. So they create their own little worship community conference for people, churches in the area to come. Sometimes there are a group of churches in the same, not denomination necessarily, but same family. Like Abundant Life in New Jersey, they have like 12 churches. So we do a conference for them called Joy Songs, and they all come together. And Sovereign Grace, Bob Coughlin, a similar thing. Sovereign Grace churches come to his national conference. But when you localize that, it becomes a very effective way for them to have training for everybody in that area, not just their church.
And that's still you coming.
Yeah.
Them bringing you in, but then they're getting other churches involved to help offset the cost. Yeah. That's great. Man, this is so good. Thank you for sharing this. Where can people find you if they want to reach out and have you come? Okay, well, my website's being reconstructed right now. It's kind of dated. Let it kind of go to seed over the pandemic. But my son's a graphic designer, content creator, and he's working on a new website for me right now. But until then, they can reach me at doug@worshipmd.com. Okay. Or worshipmd@gmail.com. Okay. Or my phone number. I have one phone number. 609-273-5397. They can call me. You're a brave man for putting a phone number out there in the public. Yeah. But that's what you do. I get it. I get so much spam now. I don't. Yeah. And worshipmd.com, that's the website it's a website. It's being like I said, if you look at it, it's going to be kind of old. My articles are on there, which are useful. You'll see EMT up in the corner, but it hasn't been launched. Okay. And there's some videos on there, but my clients right now are different. I'm still doing worship artist relations for Martin Guitar. Okay. They hired me back after letting me go when the pandemic was happening because Martin was shut down for 2 years. They couldn't make any guitars. So they didn't need an artist relations person, obviously. There was no touring going on. Yeah. I'm doing Heil microphones. I'm doing AEA ribbon microphones. And I'm doing Mackie right now. So the clients on my website are different. And they would see that's not what he said on the podcast, and that's why. That's all being changed right now. So let me ask you this. When you're talking about doing artist relations, you're the person, that's you saying, I'm the person that goes out and represents Martin Guitars or Mackie, electronics, whatever, and going and getting artists and musicians to represent us. Yeah. And what they do as their career. Yep. We're sponsoring them basically. Yep. That's part of it. Yeah. So how do you go about that? How do you, as an artist relations person for these companies, how do you reach out to an artist or a musician to say, hey, we want you to be the guy that, is promoting our product, and you get in, does that mean for them? Now, I personally know, but for the audience, does that mean that the artist or the musician, they get to use those products for free? Do they get it for cost, or what does that mean to do all that kind of stuff? Because I haven't had a chance to talk with someone from your perspective who's actually the artist relations person for the company. I've talked to the artists who have been trying to get deals with guys like you, but to hear it from your perspective, what does that look like? Okay. So first off, remember you asked me about the logo, if that was my idea or not? Right. Same thing happened with Martin. Okay. I don't play guitar. Okay. I play keyboards. Yep. But I come from the audio side of the industry more than the music side, even though I'm a musician. So when I was interviewing clients at NAMM Show one year, I interviewed with Bose, this big speaker manufacturer. Oh yeah, I use Bose. And Mitch Nolman was one of the executives. And Mitch Nolman wanted me to come on work for him, but I decided I would opt for Korg instead because Korg had a wider breadth of products. They had keyboards, they had Marshall, they had Vox AC30s, they had HK Element speaker systems, synthesizers and keyboards were my thing. Right. And they had some speakers too. So I said, I think I'm going to go with Korg. So they got kind of ticked off at me because
I initially accepted, but then rejected, went with Korg. Years later, I get a call from Mitch Nolman. I knew he had been canned at Bose 6 months after I refused the job, and he ended up somewhere. And then I didn't know where he went. And he calls me one day. He says, Doug, are you still doing that worship thing? I said, worship thing? Yeah, I'm still doing that worship thing. He goes, Taylor is kicking our fanny in the worship market. And I said, no, they're not. He said, what do you mean? I says, just watch videos, man. All the main guys are playing Martins. He's like, who? I says, like Hillsong? Hill who?
Mm-hmm.
Elevation, Gateway, Bethel, Jesus Culture, Shane and Shane. They're all playing Martins. See, my job as artist relations is not just to introduce a brand to this community that they want to reach. My job for you as Martin Guitars is to also show you who the champions are that are already playing your instruments that you don't have a clue who they are. So case in point, I said, you've got an Eric Clapton, you've got a John Mayer signature. Let's see how many views they have on YouTube. 70 million, 80 million. That's great. How about this little girl? You ever heard of Brooke Liquorwood? No. You never heard of Hillsong? Well, she was part of Hillsong. This is a song called What a Beautiful Name. I want you to look at how many views she has. 500 million. And their jaws dropped. And she was playing an Eric Clapton in the video.
Yeah.
I said she owns nothing but Martins. She has a Paul Simon vintage. She has an Eric Clapton. Her first guitar ever given to her was a Martin. They said, you got to bring her to the factory. So we brought her to the factory, sat her down, design team met with her, and they designed a Brooke Liquorwood signature guitar, which just came out in February. Natural or sunburst. She's only the 9th female artist, I believe, to have a signature.
That's cool.
And they're selling. I just sold one at Soulfest. I had a sample in my booth, and another artist named James Collington bought my sample, Brooke Liquorwood, from me. But they had no clue who she was. I guess that's the point. And since then, if I'm at a conference, I'll have 5, 6 Martins in my booth for anybody to play. But then I'm going backstage and talking to artists, and they're coming back and saying me about what it will take to get them a Martin that they might want. And it's a significant deal for artist pricing. Nothing's for free. They don't give away guitars, but they get a significant discount below what probably any retailer would give you.
Right.
And I've talked, I don't know how many I've sold to Shane and Shane, to Bethel. I think they have 20 OM21s now. All the same model. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Brian Johnson plays one. Gateway, nothing but a Martin house. Elevation, Chris Brown bought 2 from me. Tony Brown from House Fires, Nate Moore bought one. So they all call me when they want stuff. David Leonard in Franklin, The Creek, his studio. Ted T bought a couple from me. So
yeah,
the word gets out, and that's what this all is. I mean, I'm not out there advertising, come to me to buy a Martin. But if an artist talks to another artist, you need to talk to Doug, and he'll get you hooked up. With AEA, it's pretty much the same thing because it's a high-end ribbon mic. You're talking $1,000 to $4,000 or $5,000 microphones that are going to be found in studios. So what I do there is I just try to connect them to the manufacturer. They usually send a demo kit of the mics where they can audition them, and they end up buying them. I've only been with AEA a very short time, but we've already sold probably 4 or 5 of their ribbons in a month. And that's a significant discount for artists too. For Heil and Mackey, it's more the church consumer electronics thing. And I'm teaching audio classes using their equipment in my workshops. So
okay,
it's all over the place.
Sure. When an artist or musician is like, okay, I really want Martin, I want to be a Martin guitar player. I want to be endorsed by Martin Guitars.
Yeah.
They reach out to you to make that happen.
Yeah.
When someone reaches out to you and it's not Elevation, it's not Gateway, it's not Bethel or Shane and Shane or whoever, it's not someone that you're familiar with, what does it take for you as artist relations for Martin Guitar or these other companies to say to the artist, okay, we'll bring you on board, and you'll be an endorsee of, you're going to endorse our brand, and we're going to give you a discount on these products. Do you have something that tells you, okay, we're going to bring this person on, or do you ever say, no, we're not interested, or how does that work?
Yeah, I guess I look at the specifics. I mean, if they're not signed by some published deal or something, like if they're not a recording artist, I might look at some other things to see if they would qualify. And when we say endorse, we're not really endorsing anybody per se, because Martin doesn't put restrictions on what you can play. If we sell you a Martin, that doesn't mean you can't play your Taylor, your Gould, or your Gibson.
Right.
So you're not exclusive with us. So they list certain artists that they think are playing Martins that are influencers, like Brooke, like Mac Powell. He's not even really a guitar player; he's a singer, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know Mac. He's been on the podcast.
But like David Cleveland, he's done videos for me, so I've given him Martin deals when he's wanted them. If you're a full-time worship pastor and you don't make a lot of money, I'll probably find some way of getting your Martin at close to the artist pricing.
Yeah.
But I don't want every worship leader in America now calling me up and saying, hey, can you give me the artist deal? No, right. But I have connections with retailers who, like Sweetwater, like AMS, some of those companies who know me. I send them people and they give a discount for those folks. So
okay. That's cool.
Now, if you want one for yourself, call me.
Sure. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I might hit you up on that. So. And that's one of the beautiful things about relationships and connecting with people. And we talk about this all the time on this podcast, all the time, is that this industry is built on relationships.
Yep.
Everything is relational in this industry. And so, though I'm not having you on here in the hopes that would say, hey, I didn't even know that you did artist relations for Martin Guitar before this conversation.
Yeah.
So I was definitely by no means having you on the show hoping that you would say, hey, if you needed a guitar from Martin Guitars, let me know and I'll get you a deal. That being said, thank you. But that, I appreciate that. And that's one of the great things about the relationship aspect of the music industry is that once you start having a relationship with someone and you create some rapport with them and some trust, then, they're willing to offer things to you that you may not get otherwise. Right. Does that make sense? Yeah. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate it. And I might hit you up on that. I have to look at some financial things, but we'll figure that out. So, well, as we wrap up, and thank you. I mean, this has been great, wonderful information that I haven't got to talk about with a lot of other people yet. So this is really cool to kind of get your perspective on these things. But as we wrap up, what's some advice that you would give to listeners that want to do what you have done, specifically in audio production and in whether or not they want to be a sound tech guy, whether it be for a church or mainstream venue or whatever, or they want to be somebody wants to be an artist relation person for a company. Like I would love to be the artist relation guitar for Taylor Guitars or Shure mics or whatever it is.
Yep.
Or somebody wants to go out and do seminars. Like I would love to go out and train people and work with churches or different venues and help just like you do.
Right.
For people that want to do that kind of stuff, what is the advice that you would give them to be successful at doing those things? Some do's, some don'ts, maybe, to make those things work for them.
Okay. So first step is get networked. You talk about relationships. I wouldn't be anywhere where I am today. It's not my audio or my music experience that's got me here. It's gotten me here because of how old I am and all the people I've met along the way who have helped me find opportunities. That's the only reason. Okay. I'm not really as I said before, I'm not the most skilled engineer or the most skilled musician, but my network and God have opened doors for me that I couldn't have gotten unless I had that network. That network's been ongoing and it's still expanding. Every time I go out and do something, my network gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's not necessarily a social media kind of network. I have friends on Facebook that I've never met in my life. They come up to me, hey, Doug, how you been, man?
Yeah.
I go, who are you?
Right.
Your friend 4,902. I'm sorry I don't know your name. I like the face-to-face, and that's why I don't like virtual teaching as much as I do like rubbing shoulders with people. You get the body language, you get all of that stuff, and that I feed on that. So talk to as many people, hang out with as many people that you respect or just want to come alongside of and be a shadow. Be willing to do anything to try to glean and learn from these people and make friends in the process. So start there. And then whatever you're leaning toward to in terms of like whether it's music or whether it's production in a studio or a live thing, try to find some opportunities that are going to help you in that. Is there a local recording studio that you can hang out with, which are rare now? You know, everybody's doing it home studio thing. But is there a kid you know who produces music in his house? Hang out with him. Is there a community theater that you can hang out with? Is there a local band you might want to start or play with or jam with? I mean, I don't even know why churches who have musicians don't have jam nights once in a while. Not just a worship rehearsal, but just a time to come together and have fun playing music together. And that creates camaraderie. That creates relationship, those kind of things, as opposed to, all right, we're doing song 1, song 2, song 3. Let's get it done and let's get out of here and be back Sunday. It's not the same thing.
Sure.
So network experiences, local becomes more regional becomes more national becomes more global. And one thing, Lisa, I have friends all over the world. I taught seminars in Peru. I've taught them in Italy. I've taught them in London. I have people over there that I know. It's crazy. And not because of me, but because of where God has led my steps to. And then you take advantage of those situations when you're there to say, what can I do to serve these people that I'm here with? And that goes a long way. Be a servant always. Philippians 2:1-11. Be humble. Think of others more than yourself. Christ did it to the point of death. He was a servant. He died for us. Mm-hmm. What can we do? We can't even bring water to the platform for the worship team? Come on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I appreciate you sharing your expertise with my audience. And I hope and pray people will take what we've talked about here and apply it to their lives and to their careers and to their churches. And hopefully reach out to you and say, hey, I learned this from you off of this podcast. Wow. That would be super cool for me to hear from people to say, hey, I heard Doug on your podcast and we had him in, or we learned this and from him and we've applied this to what we do now, and it has made a huge difference to what we do. That'd be amazing for me. So hopefully those types of things will take place. So thank you for being on the show today. I'm so grateful.
My pleasure, man. It was a pleasure being with you and talking to you, getting to know you a little bit. And hopefully we can hang out sometime in the future when I'm in Nashville again.
Yes, definitely. Right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye, man.
Bye-bye. All right, guys, there you have it. I hope you had a great time listening to our conversation today. I hope you take what we've talked about today and find ways to apply it to your career as well. Please be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you listen to it on. And please share it with all of your friends so that we can continue to get this message out to everyone around the world. Remember, Edenbrook Productions is here to help if you need consulting services via phone, Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime. Let us know how we can help you begin to make a living in the music industry.